Along a Pleistocene shoreline they gather small marine shells whose surfaces are worn smooth by sand and tide, selecting those already pierced or thinning the lip with careful blows so a hole opens, and in the dim light of a hearth they rub red ochre into grooves until the colour settles into the calcium, then thread the pieces one by one. What takes shape is not tool or weapon but ornament, and in North Africa a cave near today's Atlantic coast preserves such shell beads dated to roughly 142,000 years ago among the oldest known personal jewellery. The evidence is quiet yet precise. Nacreous shells with naturally weak spots widened by human action, edges microchipped from rubbing on cord, glossy facets where beads strike each other in use, and residues of pigment that migrate into microscopic pits. Together, these traces indicate long wear on the body rather than chance accumulation. Elsewhere across the Levant and southern Africa, younger but kindred finds pierced shells. Ochre-stained pieces and strings inferred from wear recur in layers spanning tens of millennia, suggesting that small ornaments spread through networks of foragers who meet part and meet again along coasts and river corridors. A lesser-known detail strengthens this view. Some shells occur far from living shores, implying that people carry them inland across distances that outlast seasons, as if the objects themselves travel with stories, names, or obligations attached. The unresolved question is not whether these are artifacts, but what kind of message they bear. Do strings of shells signal group identity across wide territories, mark life stages, bind alliances, or simply please the eye? And do similar practices among Neanderthals, such as modified talons or pigment-stained shells, represent parallel traditions or shared knowledge? The record cannot speak intent directly, yet repetition across sites and centuries hints at conventions recognized by many. On the planetary scale, their world breathes to the pulse of glacial cycles as ice waxes and wanes. Sea levels oscillate by tens of meters, exposing broad shelves in cold phases and flooding them in warm interglacials. Coastlines advance and retreat. Estuaries rework sandbars and resource maps redraw themselves so that people move with tides of climate as much as with herds or seasons. During warmer intervals, greener corridors open across parts of the Sahara, linking basins and oases, while along temperate margins kelp forests, shellfish beds and stranded rack lines offer steady foods and bright portable materials. Tiny beads become durable signals in a landscape of shifting paths. Scale compresses in the hand, a bead smaller than a fingernail survives where hides and voices do not older than cities, by well over 100 millennia, and its wear mirrors bodies in motion, sweat, skin and fibre are braided together over years. A consensus forms around these ornaments as markers of symbolic behaviour among early Homo sapiens, yet debate continues over thresholds whether beads inaugurate a new cognitive horizon or simply make visible a capacity for meaning already active in song gesture and landscape marking. Still, the scene remains grounded in what the layers preserve: hearth ash, dimming to grey shells strung and restrung, until their edges round off ochre ground to powder and pressed into chalky curves, and people drifting between coast and hinterland, carrying small shining signs of belonging. In this slow light, jewellery is not luxury but memory that can be worn, a portable archive of ties that outlast a camp, a season, or a shoreline renewed by the turning of dice and sea. In caves of North Africa and the Levant, excavators sift through layers of sediment where stone tools, hearth ash, and fragments of ochre lie interwoven, and within these deposits small shells reappear pierced, stained, and worn in patterns too consistent to be accidental. The continuity across sites suggests not isolated invention but shared habits that endure over thousands of years, carried by communities moving with climate corridors. At Tafaralt in Morocco, beads of Nassarius gibbosulus cluster in contexts dated to around 82,000 years ago, their surfaces marked with use wear that reveals repeated contact with fibers, and at Skul and Kafsa caves in Israel, similar shells bear traces of pigment and stringing. These finds reinforce consensus that jewellery emerges early and widely, becoming a recognisable hallmark of Homo sapiens long before the Holocene. A lesser-known element is that some shells were collected from beaches tens of kilometres distant, with no evidence of natural transport. This demonstrates deliberate movement of objects across terrain, perhaps through exchange between groups, and underscores the value attached to them. The unresolved mystery concerns meaning. Were these beads worn daily as constant identifiers, or reserved for gatherings when alliances were negotiated and kinship renewed? Archaeologists debate whether early ornaments imply self-awareness expressed socially, or whether they served as practical tokens of affiliation in times when groups converged at rivers, lakes, or hunting grounds. The artifacts themselves cannot answer, yet the wear, pigment, and context all point to intentional repeated use within symbolic frames. On the planetary scale, these early ornaments emerge against the backdrop of fluctuating climates of the last glacial period. Around 80,000 years ago, sea levels are lower by dozens of meters, exposing vast coastal shelves that create extended foraging grounds, rich in shellfish, seaweed, and bird rookeries. Periodic pulses of aridity in the Sahara alternately close and open green corridors, dictating when and how populations can move northward or retreat to refugia along coasts and mountains. Such vast rhythms define the availability of shells themselves, and the act of transporting them inland creates enduring contrast between places of origin and places of display. Scale finds its measure in the distance. To carry a bead from the Mediterranean shore to an inland cave is a journey spanning days or weeks on foot, a rhythm slower than tide but faster than glacial cycles, and in such motions objects acquire significance beyond material form. Consensus in paleoanthropology increasingly regards these early ornaments as signals of symbolic communication, part of the broader suite of behaviours, including ochre use, engraved patterns, and burial practices that testify to modern cognition. Yet another unresolved question lies in parallel evidence from Neanderthal contexts where eagle talons and pigment-stained shells appear in deposits tens of thousands of years old. Whether these reflect independent invention, shared contacts, or convergent practices remains a matter of study, but they remind us that symbolism may not belong to one lineage alone. Still, the image that endures is calm and precise. A small group seated in the glow of a hearth, threading shells onto sinew, while others grind, pigment the beads, catching light as they pass from hand to hand. And in the stillness of caves the ornaments rest, waiting through tens of millennia, to testify that even in deep prehistory, people carry signs of meaning on their bodies, fragile yet enduring, across ages of shifting climate and stone. In the strata of Blombos Cave on the southern coast of Africa, excavations reveal another chapter of ornament making where perforated Nassarius kraussianus shells appear in levels dating back about 75,000 years, nestled among ochre pieces engraved with abstract patterns. These finds expand the geographic range of early jewellery, showing that symbolic adornment is not confined to one corridor, but recurs wherever Homo sapiens groups gather by the sea. The beads bear microscopic facets from rubbing against one another, and some carry residues of red pigment, evidence that they were strung, worn, and coloured. The consensus among archaeologists is that these objects represent one of the earliest combined traditions of portable art and personal ornamentation. A lesser-known detail is that certain beads were not only pierced, but also sorted by size and colour, before stringing, implying choices guided by aesthetic or symbolic rules rather than chance assembly. This hints at an early sense of order in decoration, suggesting that adornment itself followed conventions understood by many. The unresolved mystery concerns the role such ornaments played in society. Were they badges of status, signs of belonging to a group, or protective charms linked to myth and ritual? No clear answers remain, but the persistence of beads across thousands of years indicates they held more than passing interest. On the planetary scale, the world around Blombos Cave is shifting with glacial rhythms. Sea levels are lower by over 50 meters compared to the present, exposing broad coastal shelves teeming with shellfish, kelp, and migratory seabirds. Inland cooler climates foster steppe-like landscapes where game animals roam. Human groups adapt to these shifting ecologies, moving between coasts and interior valleys, and the beads they carry mark continuity across changing worlds. Scale can be seen in the journeys themselves. A string of beads represents labour in collection piercing, and wear that may span multiple lifetimes, and when carried inland, each shell anchors memory of distant shores. Consensus in anthropology holds that symbolic objects like these mark cognitive modernity, yet debate persists over whether they signify a sudden revolution or a long gradual accumulation of practices. Some scholars argue that the engraved ochre and beads from Blombos signal a leap in abstract thought, while others suggest that symbolism evolves slowly, appearing in scattered traditions that only later coalesce into widespread norms. Another enigma lies in the universality of ornamentation. Why do small, fragile shells become the chosen medium across distant continents and millennia? Perhaps their durability, luster, and portability make them ideal for carrying meaning, but the specific choices remain lost to time. Still, the quiet image survives people seated near the cave entrance as waves break below, sorting shells by torchlight, threading them onto sinew cords, passing strings among themselves as pigment dust settles on their hands. These objects, no larger than a fingertip, endure longer than bones, hides, or voices, carrying across 75,000 years the human impulse to mark identity and memory in form that can be worn on the body and seen by others. Across the eastern Mediterranean, further traces of ancient jewellery appear in caves where Homo sapiens and Neanderthals once sheltered. At sites such as Ksar Akil in Lebanon and Kafse in Israel, pierced shells dated between 90,000 and 100,000 years ago show polish and edge wear consistent with long use, suggesting that ornament traditions endured across varied populations. Some of these shells were collected from the Mediterranean coast, yet found far inland, demonstrating deliberate transport and perhaps exchange between groups. Consensus among archaeologists identifies them as evidence of symbolic expression, tied to early human communities, though their precise meanings remain out of reach. A lesser-known observation from Ksar Akil is that beads of different species, some brightly coloured when fresh, were chosen and combined, indicating aesthetic sensibility as well as symbolic intent. The unresolved mystery persists. Did these beads function as identifiers of community, markers of ritual moments, or tokens of alliances between bands that met only seasonally? The archaeological record offers clues, but no definitive answer, leaving space for multiple interpretations grounded in wear patterns and contexts. On the planetary scale, the late Pleistocene climate oscillates between warm interstadials and colder episodes, driving shifts in vegetation, water availability, and animal ranges. During warmer intervals, corridors open across the Levant, linking Africa and Eurasia and facilitating both migration and cultural exchange. Shell beads recovered here reflect these global rhythms, for as coastlines advanced and retreated, with sea level changes of tens of meters, the sources of ornament materials shifted as well, requiring humans to adapt and maintain symbolic traditions amid changing landscapes. Scale is visible in the contrast between bead and world. A pierced shell, no larger than a fingertip, embodies journeys across mountain valleys and river crossings, an object carried through lifetimes, while ice masses grow and shrink thousands of kilometers away. Consensus builds around the interpretation that such ornaments serve as some of the earliest external markers of social identity, extending beyond the body into shared visible symbols. Yet an enigma remains when similar evidence surfaces in Neanderthal contexts. Modified talons and shells with pigment stains suggest that symbolic ornamentation may not have been unique to Homo sapiens. Did these traditions arise independently, or were they transmitted through contact between populations? Genetic studies show interbreeding, but whether beads were part of cultural exchange remains unresolved. Still, the imagery is steady. Small groups huddled in a cave mouth, threading shells into necklaces, ochre powder scattered across stone slabs, while outside the climate shifts in cycles larger than memory. The beads endure while shelters collapse and rivers shift course, carrying across millennia the first tangible signs that humans sought to represent themselves in ways visible to others. In the quiet glow of a hearth, the action is deliberate yet unhurried, threading shells into order, creating patterns that hold meaning beyond immediate survival, a gesture that reveals cognition, stretching beyond the present hunt or fire toward identity and belonging woven in fragile threads of stone and sea. In the archaeological record of North Africa, further evidence emerges at Grotte des Pigeons near Taferalt, where deposits dated to around 82,000 years ago contain dozens of pierced nacarious shells, many coated in red ochre and showing facets from long use. Their consistent modification demonstrates deliberate craftsmanship rather than chance wear, and consensus identifies them as part of the earliest widespread jewelry traditions known. These beads were likely strung and worn against skin or clothing, serving as visible markers in gatherings of mobile groups. A lesser-known detail from Taferalt is that some shells were burned not by accident, but in context suggesting intentional heating, perhaps to alter colour or texture before use. This small act implies a sophisticated awareness of material properties and a willingness to transform natural objects into symbolic artifacts. The unresolved mystery remains whether such beads represented personal adornment chosen by individuals or collective symbols recognized by all members of a group. Did they serve as tokens of lineage, signals of alliance, or protective charms tied to ritual? Archaeologists cannot decode intent, but the repeated recovery of similar objects across wide regions shows that their meaning was shared broadly enough to endure for tens of millennia. On the planetary scale, the world of 80,000 years ago is one of alternating aridity and humidity. During wetter intervals, green corridors stretch across parts of the Sahara, allowing people and animals to disperse between coasts and inland valleys. During dry phases, deserts expand, restricting movement and concentrating populations along refuges where water and food remain available. These climate pulses shape the distribution of sites and the preservation of beads for where humans gather under more favorable conditions. Ornaments accumulate and survive. Scale is evident in the distances traveled. Some shells found at Taferalt must have been carried at least 40 kilometers from the coast, a journey requiring deliberate effort across rugged terrain. Such transport underlines the value of ornaments, objects light enough to carry yet heavy with symbolic meaning. Consensus in paleoanthropology increasingly situates jewelry within a broader suite of symbolic practices that also includes the use of pigments, engravings on ochre, and the preparation of ritual spaces. Together, these behaviors mark cognitive modernity, the capacity to create meaning beyond immediate function. Yet enigmas persist. Why are beads absent in some regions where Homo sapiens lived at the same time? Did certain groups lack the tradition, or have their ornaments simply failed to preserve? And why shells small and fragile rather than bone, stone, or wood? Perhaps the luminous surfaces of marine shells carried associations with water life and continuity that made them powerful symbols across groups. The enduring image is one of people seated in dim caves grinding ochre into powder, threading small shells onto sinew or plant fibers, passing them from hand to hand in firelight. Outside, climates shift, seas rise and fall, and landscapes change, but the beads remain silent witnesses of a tradition older than cities, by more than 100 millennia fragments of the first known jewellery crafted by human hands to carry meaning into the world. Farther south in the record of coastal South Africa, beads from sites such as Border Cave and Sibudu add to the story, showing that by 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, the practice of threading shells and applying ochre extended deep into the continent. These finds broaden the map of early symbolism, confirming that personal ornaments are not limited to a single region, but appear wherever Homo sapiens maintain close ties to marine environments. Consensus among archaeologists is that such artifacts reflect shared traditions of symbolic communication, though the range of variation hints at local styles and preferences. A lesser-known observation from Sibudu is that alongside pierced shells, residues of plant fibers suggest early cordage technology, the material that once held necklaces together but rarely survives. This indirect evidence highlights the complexity of technologies intertwined with ornament making. The unresolved mystery lies in whether these ornaments were simply adornments or part of ritual performances that involved movement, sound, and collective recognition. Beads make noise when they strike against one another, so necklaces or bracelets could have produced rhythmic clicks that added to gatherings around firelight, yet this acoustic dimension remains speculative. On the planetary scale, these traditions unfold during a time when glacial cycles dominate global climates. Ice sheets in the northern hemisphere expand and contract, drawing down sea levels by more than 60 meters at times, exposing continental shelves that widen coastlines and create new habitats rich in shellfish and seabirds. Human populations adapt to these dynamic environments, shifting their settlements as shorelines advance or retreat. The continuity of bead use across changing coasts demonstrates that while landscapes altered dramatically, symbolic practices endured. Scale is found in the persistence of small objects across immense time spans. Each bead may be worn for years passed between generations, or restrung countless times, carrying with it both the memory of the sea and the identity of the wearer. Archaeologists increasingly view such ornaments as part of a broader behavioral suite that includes engraved bone-decorated ochre and ritual burials, all pointing towards symbolic cognition long before the rise of agriculture. Yet enigmas remain unresolved. Why do beads appear abundantly in some coastal caves but remain rare in inland sites? Are inland groups marking identity with perishable materials now lost, or did symbolism manifest differently across environments? Another puzzle involves Neanderthals who in Iberian contexts also left shells with pigment residues. Whether this represents convergence imitation or shared ancestry is still debated. Still, the imagery that persists is evocative. A small group seated under a rock shelter as evening settles, children threading beads while elders grind ochre the fire, casting shadows across stone walls streaked with pigment. Outside, waves break against a shoreline now long vanished beneath rising seas, but the beads remain their drilled holes and polished edges, recording the friction of cord and skin. These small ornaments endure as evidence that in a world of shifting climates and uncertain futures, humans invested time and care into creating symbols that signaled belonging, memory, and meaning, fragile yet lasting across tens of millennia. In later stages of the Middle Stone Age, ornaments spread into regions far from immediate coastlines, appearing in sites where seashells could only have arrived through long-distance transport or exchange. At Wedjabana in Algeria, pierced shells surface more than 200 kilometers from the nearest shore, an indication that people carried or traded them across arid landscapes. This detail underscores the symbolic weight of ornaments, for such fragile items would not be moved so far unless their meaning justified the effort. Consensus holds that jewelry served as portable signs of identity in mobile societies where groups often met only seasonally. Beads provided a visible language that signaled kinship alliance or shared belief. A lesser-known observation is that some shells appear in clusters within hearth areas, suggesting they may have been stored or displayed collectively, not only worn on the body. This pattern hints at ornaments being part of gatherings where strings of beads could be exchanged, compared, or ritually presented. The unresolved mystery lies in whether such practices represent the first, organized systems of symbolic communication, or simply one expression among many in early cognitive life. Were beads part of a larger repertoire that included body painting, song and gesture, much of which has left no trace? Archaeologists must work with fragments, knowing that what survives may be only a fraction of the symbolic practices once in play. On the planetary scale, these inland finds coincide with periods of climatic oscillation that open and close green corridors through the Sahara. During wetter phases, rivers and lakes draw people northward, enabling contacts between coastal and interior groups. During arid phases, deserts expand, isolating populations into refugia, where traditions may have been maintained in relative seclusion. The beads carried across these shifting landscapes serve as tangible connectors between distant regions, tiny archives of interaction at continental scales. Scale is further revealed by the comparison of object and journey. A shell no larger than a fingernail embodies weeks of travel on foot, through valleys, over ridges and across dry plains, its polished whole recording not just wear but movement across worlds. Consensus interpretation emphasizes that these objects signal the emergence of what anthropologists call extended phenotype tools and ornaments that externalize identity, making social information visible beyond the body. Yet enigmas persist, particularly regarding contemporaneous hominins. In certain Iberian and Italian contexts, Neanderthals left modified claws and pigment-stained shells that resemble symbolic artifacts. Did similar traditions develop independently, or were they exchanged during periods of contact with Homo sapiens? The answer remains uncertain, though the existence of overlapping evidence suggests that symbolic ornamentation may not have been the monopoly of a single lineage. Still, the enduring image is one of people gathered in the glow of fire, strings of shells laid out on stone slabs, hands passing them across generations, while outside the world shifts through cycles of green and desert. The beads' fragile yet enduring bridge coast and interior season, and memory testifying that in early human life, identity was carried not only in words and actions, but also in the quiet persistence of jewelry fashioned from the sea. By the Upper Paleolithic, around 40,000 to 30,000 years ago, the tradition of personal ornaments expands and diversifies, appearing not only as pierced shells, but also as teeth bones and ivory pendants, each modified for suspension. In European contexts, such as sites along the Danube, strings of perforated animal teeth accompany burials, while in Africa and the Levant shell beads continue to circulate. Consensus among archaeologists holds that by this stage jewellery had become integral to social life, functioning as markers of group affiliation, ritual practice, and perhaps even exchange networks. A lesser-known observation from sites like Sungir in Russia is that thousands of beads were interred, with individuals each bead drilled and polished, representing years of labour invested in ornament production. Such accumulations emphasize the centrality of adornment in symbolic systems. The unresolved mystery remains whether such elaboration reflects social stratification emerging within hunter-gatherer bands, or whether it represents communal investment in honouring the dead. Archaeologists debate whether the presence of rich ornaments indicates hierarchy or collective expression, as interpretations depend on sparse and varied contexts. On the planetary scale, these developments coincide with the last glacial maximum, when ice sheets expand over much of the northern hemisphere, and sea levels drop by more than 100 meters, exposing continental shelves and creating vast steppe landscapes. Despite harsh climates, jewelry traditions flourish, demonstrating that symbolic expression persists even under environmental stress. Ornaments thus become not luxuries of abundance, but necessities of identity in times of challenge. Scale is found in the sheer number of beads. In some burials, more than 3,000 small ivory or shell pieces were sewn onto clothing, a work requiring thousands of hours. Such investment illustrates the importance of ornamentation in signaling group values and preserving identity across generations. Consensus interpretation stresses that the universality of ornamentation across continents reveals deep roots in human cognition, likely stretching back to the earliest shell beads of Africa. Yet enigmas remain regarding continuity. Were Upper Paleolithic traditions directly descended from the earliest ornaments of 150,000 years ago, or did symbolic systems emerge repeatedly in different regions? The archaeological record is too incomplete to confirm direct lines, leaving open the possibility of independent reinvention. Still, the enduring image resonates. Communities gathered in icy landscapes, cloaked in garments adorned with rows of beads, their figures illuminated by firelight reflecting off polished shells and teeth. Even as glaciers spread across continents and climates pressed hard on survival, people invested in creating and wearing objects that carried meaning beyond function. Jewelry in this epoch becomes not only a marker of identity but a thread of continuity, linking distant times and places, a fragile yet enduring expression of humanity's shared impulse to inscribe memory and belonging onto the body. As the Pleistocene draws toward its close ornament, traditions become ever more embedded in daily and ritual life, accompanying the rise of more permanent settlements in some regions, and the spread of Homo sapiens across the globe. In North Africa, shell beads continue to appear in caves and open-air sites, while in Europe, elaborate burials with bead-covered clothing and pendants of bone, antler and ivory show that jewelry is integrated into both life and death. In the Levant, pierced shells from late Paleolithic contexts demonstrate that even as climates fluctuated and groups shifted territories, the practice of threading and wearing ornaments endured. Consensus affirms that by 20,000 years ago, personal jewelry was a widespread human norm signaling identity across continents. A lesser-known detail comes from East Africa, where ostrich eggshell beads meticulously drilled and polished appear in great numbers. These beads are distinctive because their raw material required skilled shaping and uniform drilling, a process that yielded remarkably consistent sizes. Some researchers note that such standardization may have allowed beads to serve as proto-currency in exchanges, an early medium of value embedded in ornament. The unresolved mystery concerns function. Were ostrich eggshell beads and shell ornaments purely decorative, or did they carry codified messages, perhaps encoding kinship or obligations? Ethnographic parallels suggest that beadwork often communicates social information, yet direct evidence from prehistory is silent. On the planetary scale, the world is in flux. The last glacial maximum slowly recedes. Sea levels begin to rise and new corridors of movement open. In Asia, humans expand across northern steppes. In the Americas, recently arrived populations adapt to varied landscapes. In Sahel, long isolated groups continue their own ornament traditions. Jewelry appears everywhere in materials as diverse as marine shells. Teeth bones, ivory and eggshell, a global chorus of symbolic expression. Scale is evident in the persistence of these fragile objects. Beads no larger than a grain of rice outlast entire landscapes, enduring while glaciers retreat, coastlines redraw and megafauna vanish. They testify to human continuity across worlds otherwise unrecognizable. Consensus interpretation holds that ornaments are among the clearest markers of symbolic thought, reinforcing that identity and memory are externalized in portable form. Yet enigmas persist in the uneven distribution of finds. Some regions yield dense bead assemblages while others remain nearly silent. Does this reflect true absence, taphonomic loss, or differences in symbolic systems that left no durable trace? Archaeologists continue to test these gaps, knowing that jewellery is only one thread in a larger tapestry of symbolic life. Still, the enduring image holds calm power, a group seated in a rock shelter as twilight falls, threading ostrich eggshell discs onto sinew, passing strings from hand to hand as ochre dust settles into grooves. Children watch and learn the motions while elders recall the origins of beads carried from far-off valleys. Outside, the world warms, rivers swell and forests expand, but within the circle of light the beads endure fragile links of continuity that bind past to present, body to memory, identity to landscape. Section 10. Word count 591. By the threshold of the Holocene, as climates stabilize and glaciers retreat, jewellery remains a constant thread in the unfolding story of humanity. Across Africa, Eurasia, and the emerging Americas, ornaments appear in burials, in settlements, and scattered through campsites where people once gathered evidence that personal adornment is no longer an occasional practice, but a deeply rooted tradition. Consensus among archaeologists is that by 12,000 years ago, jewellery had become a nearly universal human expression, marking social bonds, signalling belonging, and carrying memory across generations. A lesser-known discovery comes from early farming communities in Anatolia and the Levant, where beads of stone bone and shell appear alongside the first domesticated plants and animals. These ornaments suggest continuity between forager traditions and the new settled life ways, a reminder that even as economies changed, the impulse to wear symbols remained. The unresolved mystery lies in the origin of this continuity. Did agricultural communities inherit bead-making directly from their mobile ancestors? Or did they reinvent ornamentation in new materials to suit emerging social orders? Archaeologists debate whether continuity reflects cultural memory or parallel adaptation, but the objects themselves carry silence rather than answers. On the planetary scale, the onset of the Holocene marks a profound transformation. Sea levels rise by more than 100 meters compared with the last glacial maximum, drowning ancient coastal plains, where many of the earliest shell beads once lay. Forests spread across Europe, and Asia deserts shift their boundaries in Africa, and monsoon systems stabilize, creating fertile grounds for cultivation. Amid these vast climatic changes, beads remain constants, tiny artifacts bridging worlds lost beneath the sea and worlds newly cultivated. Scale is visible in the contrast between smallness and endurance. A shell bead pierced 150,000 years ago outlasts entire ecosystems, carrying human marks through cycles of ice, flood, and forest. Consensus today regards jewellery as among the earliest clear signals of symbolic culture, part of a repertoire that includes pigments, engravings, and ritual burials collectively testifying to the cognitive modernity of Homo sapiens. Yet enigmas endure. Did Neanderthals and Denisovans create similar ornaments that remain undiscovered, or did such practices mark a distinctive feature of our lineage? The fragmentary record cannot resolve this question fully, leaving space for mystery. What is certain is that jewellery illustrates how humans externalized identity long before writing, long before monuments, and long before agriculture. The enduring image is both humble and profound groups seated in caves on shorelines, or within early villages, threading beads in the glow of firelight, their hands stained with ochre, their voices carried on the night air. Outside, the world shifts with planetary rhythms, ice melting seas, advancing climates stabilizing. But within these circles of light, beads pass from hand to hand, binding people, through symbols worn on the body. Across continents and millennia, the world's oldest jewellery speaks of belonging and memory. Fragile shells and stones transformed into signs that endure beyond flesh and voice. In the stillness of archaeological layers, they remain to remind us that long before temples or cities, humans marked themselves with meaning, crafting ornaments that carried identity across deep time.